children tend to interpret parental phubbing as something that's related to themselves. In their core, they start to think that they are not very worthy. So these kind of results are very depressing, but also I think to be very important because they really show that parental phubbing has real impact on our children's lives.
Beautification of communication, the Communification Podcast.
Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the first season of the Communification Podcast, Communication and Technology. Mahalo for being here. This is Ep.4. The way the podcast works is first we learn from a communication scholar and expert, and then I have guests on the pod to break down what we learned, reflect, share, and apply those research-based strategies to our own lives. This episode is a teaching and learning episode. It just so happens to be the very episode that I recorded as a part of my thesis proposal and defense. I've repurposed it, cleaned it up, and now it gets to go out into the world. This might be my thesis baby's official birthday. Happy birthday to you. Ha'olilahanal ya'oi. Full circle moment for sure. Anyone who's interested in that process or wants to take a look at my 75-page paper, you can check that out in my show notes at malikadudley.com. As usual, this podcast is available free of charge. All right, are you ready to get into it? Personally, I just re-listened to this episode and I took notes so that I can have a discussion with my family. If you want to do the same, get your journal out and a pen because research shows when we write things down, we are more likely to process that information. If you're driving or busy, I get it. I got you. I've also taken very detailed notes and put them on my website, malikadudley.com, so you can access them at your convenience. So today's episode is centered on a communication issue that my family struggles with. Today we're talking about parental phubbing. Together we'll find out from an expert what that is, why we should be concerned, and get some research-based tips from an expert. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Soo Yun Shin. She is an assistant professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the Department of Communicology, which is the scientific study of human communication. Her research topics include how technology impacts people's lives and how people process information online. I thoroughly enjoyed picking her brain, and I hope that you'll enjoy coming along for the ride. Oh, and this one is not a visual episode because I recorded it as a pilot, so it's just audio, but please enjoy. Aloha, Dr. Shin. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining me for the pilot of the Communification Podcast. I'm so excited. And also thank you for being on my thesis committee. I'm so grateful.
Aloha, Malika. Thank you for having me here. I'm also very excited about your pilot podcast project. I think this is a wonderful idea. So I hope that, I could be a good contribution to this new program you're starting.
Oh, I'm sure you will be. And actually, on that note, we want to know more about you. So why are you so interested in this field of communication and specifically how technology impacts communication? Like, where does that passion come from? And maybe you can also tell us a little bit about the things that you've studied or enjoy learning about.
Okay, I think my passion for communication technology started from my exchange student year when I was actually a senior student. And I didn't have a big dream back then. So I was like just figuring out what to do for my future. And then in that school, I met new friends who were actually studying the technology. And then more specifically, they were studying something called human-computer interaction. And then they told me that, later people are going to communicate with machines. Our world will be very different. And I was very intrigued by that idea. And now we are living in that kind of world, like artificial intelligence, Siri, Echo, Google. So I know, the future we were talking back then is here. And then nowadays, I'm actually certainly studying a little different aspects like communicating with other people through technology. But I think that the passion with the communication technology started from that experience.
Wow. Yeah, so much has changed. And now tech is everywhere.
Yes. And that's why we are doing this podcast, right? Because
Absolutely.
Technology is everywhere and then it's affecting our lives heavily.
Yes. And we need people to examine these issues. We need researchers to be doing this work, but also to teach it. So thank you so much for being here today to share your knowledge with us, because it's just so important. So to start, I will present today's communication issue. It's a very common thing. We all do it, or at least from my perspective, I feel like a lot of people do this. Maybe we don't want to admit it. Perhaps we aren't even aware we're doing it. So today's communication issue is parental phubbing. And phubbing, it's such a funny word. And I think I learned it for the first time from you in your class. I remember everyone just kind of giggled when they heard the word, but it describes a relatively serious issue. So would you mind defining the word phubbing for us? phubbing.
So phubbing is actually, yeah, a very funny sounding word. And I still also remember that people are all giggling. And then it's a combination of two words, phone plus snubbing. It's basically that people get distracted with their phone while they are talking or in close proximity with someone else. So it's like other people feel like they are being ignored or being snubbed by another person's phone using.
Could you tell me what a phubber and a phubbee is?
Yeah, so basically the person who's snubbing by using their phone while they're talking with someone else is the phubber. And then the person who's being ignored in that incident is the phubbee. That's, yeah, how we define two people in that problematic situation.
When I think of that word phubbing, I automatically have negative thoughts. I don't know. I feel like it's almost an attack. I'm not sure if I feel judged or guilty or if it's something else, but in a general sense, without getting too narrow on the parenting part of it, is there research that confirms my innate feelings that phubbing is just not a good thing, maybe pointing to concerns or issues surrounding the act of phubbing and how that impacts communication?
That's a very good question. Actually, the phubbing itself, not only the word, but the phenomenon itself is quite new to our lives. Because back then, when we are talking or in close proximity with someone else, we are only supposed to pay attention to that person. So that is our social norms and that's our expectation. But with the phone, now we can communicate simultaneously with other people who are not even in the same space. And that part is new to our life. And therefore, the expectation about what to do is not very well developed compared to our very traditional way of communicating. So that's why we are having all this kind of problem and trouble and concern about how to interpret it and how to deal with it. Am I okay with allowing it to happen to our family, or myself is okay to do that or not? Yeah, we all have these questions because it's fairly new. So regarding the impacts of phubbing behavior, there have been a few studies, and especially there have been a rising number of studies in very recent years about this phubbing. And one of the consistent findings is that people do negatively evaluate phubber. There was some very fun experiment that they invited people in. And then for one person, the researcher asked the person to use the phone while communicating with another participant. And of course, the another participant who was on the other end didn't know about that, that instruction at all. And then after the conversation, people are asked to evaluate how polite they thought their conversation partner was, or how socially attractive, or how well the conversation went, etc. They didn't like that person very much. They thought that that person is impolite. And they thought that also the communication itself did not go very well. Those kind of findings kind of confirm our negative reactions to phubbing.
It makes sense. I mean, I feel like I feel all of those. Do you feel those things?
Yes. Yeah, I would hate a person who's sitting right in front of me keep using the phone, not looking at me. That's just not a fun feeling at all.
It really isn't, but norms are changing. And especially with the coronavirus and everyone being at home more often, and we're physically separated, we're having to use technology even more than we were before. And we were already having issues with phubbing and using our phones at times that maybe some people might perceive as not being very polite or kind. So why don't we dive into that more narrow topic? So as parents, we spend so much time time thinking about our child's media use. Maybe some of you listening can relate to this. It's how to regulate that and how to guide them. There's time limits and blue light concerns. And we're just trying to keep up with how quickly technology is changing. But today we're going to flip the script and we're going to talk about the parenting side of that, the parents' use. So I have a couple of stats that I wanted to share with you. 3 out of 10 children indicated in a national survey that they wish their parents were less occupied with their devices. Nearly 3 out of 10 kids also reported they considered their parents or guardians to be addicted to their mobile phones. And parents also indicated that they struggle with device distractions. They spend too much time on their phone. In fact, nearly 7 in 10 reported that they at least sometimes are distracted by their mobile phone in the presence of their children. So I'm really interested to hear what the literature says about parental phubbing specifically.
Just like what you just said, we are spending a lot more time with my family, and the phubbing could be a very frequent behavior we observe from our family members. About the parental phubbing, there are quite a lot of survey studies that are very recently done. Consistently, what they found is that it's actually not very good for children. So that's unfortunate news given the frequency of phone using. For example, some studies found that parental phubbing, the more phubbing their parents do, the more depression or depressive symptoms their adolescent children tend to show. Some of the reasons behind it is that by seeing their parents phubbing a lot, they feel like they are less connected with the parents, and then they feel like their parents are not very warm, or some people even thought that they are rejecting them. Okay? And then also another study found a similar results, saying that some children tend to interpret parental phubbing as something that's related to themselves. So in other words, they think that it's their fault. Maybe they are not so interesting. Maybe the parents do not like me so much, and that's why they are not paying attention to me. And that if children start to make that kind of interpretation, that could be leading to lower self-evaluation. So in their core, they start to think that they are not very worthy. So these kind of results are very depressing, but also, I think to be very important because they really show that parental phubbing has real impact on our children's lives.
Absolutely. I actually did a bit of research before hopping on with you. Some other things that came up were increased family conflict, increased child behavior problems, physical safety issues, because parents aren't paying attention. So their response time goes down. And the fact that as parents, that we model behavior for our children. So when we have what researchers call problematic internet use or PIU, studies have found that our children will model that behavior and develop PIU themselves. And there were also a couple of observational studies. They were done by Radesky and colleagues in 2014 and 2015. And they showed the parents using mobile devices engaged in fewer conversations with their children. They were less responsive. And when they did respond to those bids for attention from their children, it was in a negative way compared to those who weren't phubbing. So it really does seem to span all of childhood.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, just like you said, there were some survey findings that also found the positive correlation between parental phubbing with their children's phone addiction. Definitely, they are modeling their parents' behavior in a way we don't want them to. So, yeah.
Yes. So in this case, that positive correlation would indicate that the more parents phub their children, the more depressive symptoms their children show. And, I feel guilty sometimes too. So there's that cognitive dissonance. For those of you listening, that's when your ideas and values and beliefs on the inside aren't quite matching your behavior on the outside. And, it causes you that psychological stress. And I feel guilt. And sometimes I even judge others, husband, for the very thing that I'm also sometimes doing.
Yeah, I totally understand that guilt because it's hard to be detached from technology, especially our phone. It's already a part of our lives in many aspects. But also the children see that behaviors and then their interpretations might not be as we expected, that could be problematic.
Well, hearing what you have to say about how children can perceive it, it makes sense that we would feel that guilt because we are so in tune with our children. That totally makes sense. I mean, we're not feeling guilt for no reason.
Yeah, maybe
right?
you might be sensing that a little bit. Yes. Mhm.
Well, and it's not unusual for my kids to ask me to get off of my phone. So that leads me to a slightly different question. I'm wondering if there's a difference in the way people communicate or perceive phubbing when it's a close family tie. So someone you're really comfortable with and they just call you out, hey, mom, get off the phone. And so, you just do it and you still love them, as opposed to an acquaintance or a professional relationship. I'm sure it might be context dependent as well. What are your thoughts?
So that's a good question. I think we do need more studies to investigate how that relationship closeness between the phubber and phubby makes any difference in how people interpret or how people perceive that phubbing behavior. But so far, research has been finding that it's not actually making much difference. The experimental study I told you before, they also did a comparison between people they know and people they do not know. But any of those cases, people still evaluate phubber negatively. So even for the friends, when they see that their friends do that phubbing behavior in front of them, they still do not like. And that was actually unexpected. Because people thought that maybe, for friends, people might be more forgiving. They might more understand, or just like you said, if they really do not like, they might speak up and then make them turn off their phone or focus on themselves. But it's actually not was the case. People still did not like that phubber very much. And there are also other studies like romantic partners. Phubbing behavior between romantic partners has been one of the big factors that drive more conflict and less satisfaction. And for boss and employees in the workplace, you see every day, you sometimes see your colleagues or your boss be on the phone all the time. And then some studies actually found that when employees see their managers using the phone a lot, especially phubbing behavior, they also trust that manager less. They tend to engage with that manager less, so lower engagement. So all those kind of evidence, suggests that maybe we are not more forgiving to those we are close to. Maybe it could be the other way around even, I think, because these are the people I really desire attention from, right? These are the people I really care. So if these people show that snubbing behavior, then it's really affecting me.
Wow. Yes, that all makes so much sense. Thank you, Dr. Shin, for all of those insights. Well, in order to move into those tangible strategies and research-based tips that we want to give everyone at home and that I want to learn, I thought we would bring in someone from our community. She is a mother of 3 living in Pukalani, Maui. So let's take a listen.
As a mom of 3 little ones, I feel like the hardest part is dividing my time equally and being completely present with each child. Throw my phone in the mix and it's nearly impossible. I rely on my phone for everything. I also feel the pressure of returning text messages as it's my only way of socializing with friends during the COVID era. I'm attached to my phone. When the kids are around, I make an effort to put my phone away because I want to lead by example. But it's been challenging, and Olivia, who is 5, will say, "Mommy, put your phone away," or she'll get really upset. She's even asked for her own phone and doesn't get why I won't buy one for her. Kaya, who is 3, will hide my phone under her pillow. So yes, I definitely have a lot of mom guilt when it comes to using my phone around the kids.
Well, first of all, I feel you, Mama. Thank you, Annie, for sharing. To all of you listening in right now, we'd love to hear from you too. To all the moms and dads out there, we are not all in the same boat, but we are in the same storm and we're sharing our experiences. And when we do that, it really helps us to feel more connected and not so alone in our struggles. So thank you, Annie, for being so vulnerable and sharing with us today. I think for me, what stood out most was that push and pull, that tension of using our phones for essential reasons, whether that's to connect like Annie was using it, or to make appointments for work. But as Annie shared, we're still trying our best to also be good role models for our kids. So maybe Dr. Shin, you can weigh in here with some research-based strategies that parents can use to beautify our communication with our children in this area. I mean, Annie's on the right track here, right?
Yes. Thank you, Annie. Just like Malika said, thank you for sharing your experience. And then I'm sure that a lot of parents can relate to you. And thank you for trying to be a good role model for your kids, because parents are the best model for children. And then their behaviors regarding the digital devices, their habits affect their children's digital media habits. Definitely, being a good model is an important aim and purpose to achieve. So yeah, keep working on that goal. But another thing I would advise based on research is that sometimes it's a very good idea to set a shared expectation between you and your children. There are some survey and interview studies that looked into the expectations children and parents have. For example, if they are watching something together, and if both children and parents share the expectation that the primary attention is not to each other, but it's for the media consumption, then it's okay to use phone. And maybe some person is using a phone and then another person is also feeling allowed to use the phone simultaneously, because the expectation is there that we are not supposed to talk or communicate with each other. We are allowed to use our devices. But I think it's important to actually communicate that expectation with your children beforehand, so that you are not letting this go awry, that everyone has a different expectation and then we don't know what's going to occur. So try to communicate with your children that, for example, if you need to use your phone, check your phone for your work or important business, then communicate that with your children so that the children expects that, oh, you are using that phone for this particular purpose. So your primary attention is for work for now, but mom will come back to you. so, so yeah, having set the correct expectation that's been shared among family members would be a key based on research findings.
I love that. I pulled some research done by Blackwell, Gardner, and Shinnebeck, published in 2016. It's a qualitative study. So they did interviews with 18 parent-child pairs, and the parents reported that they do communicate with their children about technology use. But the kids said, oh, yeah, well, my parents communicate with me, but they only tell me what not to do. And in most cases, it was reactive and not proactive. So that's a really great tip, to have that proactive conversation before the thing happens, and to set those shared expectations. The other thing was that parents had rules for their tech use, but no one was following them. So the parents don't follow them. The children are breaking the rules. Like, let's say it's no phone use at the dinner table. And so people aren't really committing to the rules that they create or enforcing them. So maybe we just need to get more granular with that conversation to really realize that it's going to be dependent on context. And we need to work that into our shared expectations so that there can be expectations like you were talking about for work or whatever it is, but that we communicate to our kids what that expectation is. And when there are exceptions, I mean, I guess it's just open communication, really. And in that study, children said it was okay when my parents check their phone for work. So when they don't know that you're checking it for work, they could make up whatever story they want to in their mind. Like you were saying earlier, it's me, I'm not a good person. That's why my parent, is not giving me the attention. But if we just say, oh, mommy has to do work right now, I'm so sorry, I'll get back to you soon, that can make a huge difference.
Yes, I totally agree. Of course, then mom will come back soon. That promise need to be kept. But yes, definitely I agree that the open communication would be the most essential part to solve this issue.
And there was one other thing. It was the attention. So children in this study, this is just one study, but in this study, the children didn't necessarily want more attention from their parents.
That's funny.
And I get that. Yeah, I get it, right? Like if I'm on my phone and they're on, whatever, playing dolls or whatever they're doing, we're mutually occupied with other things. But when they wanted attention, they wanted that to be reciprocated. So they didn't want to be phubbed.
Yes, I think that's very good point. It's not that we need to give 24-hour attention, but when they need it, And then when they get phubbed at that very moment, it's when things can really go awry. Definitely, it's important to sense that desire from family members and from our children, and then give our attention at the correct moments.
Oh, well, I know you're so busy and I need to let you go. I know I do, even though I want to continue talking to you forever. But to recap, I guess what it sounds like is that we need to be more intentional and less reactive. And that's a good strategy to take when tackling this issue and communicating with our children. Is there anything else you think our listeners would be interested in?
I think another thing I like to share about this phubbing is that there's fun research findings says when people see another person phubbing them, they also tend to reciprocate that behavior. They become another phubber. So that's also something we need to remember, that we don't want our children to be a phubber. So you don't want to give that kind of a conception that that is fine, because apparently no one likes it. Just remember that although we are really busy and that we need to use our devices a lot of times, but it's important to set the boundary. It's important to have an open conversation about the expectation in the family. And then just remember that my behavior could be reciprocated, could be replicated by our children. So we don't want to produce Bobby become a phubber and then that vicious cycle. So yeah, let's be the first to break the cycle.
Yes, we don't want to set that bad example. We want to try to set a good example. Well, gosh, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I learned a lot, and I hope those of you listening feel the same way. And we just skimmed the surface here. So I will provide resources for you as well in the show notes and links. So if you want to read more literature or find out more about Dr. Shin, you can go to our show notes and you'll have all those resources there. Thank you so much, Dr. Shin.
Thank you, Malika, for having me. It was really fun to talk with you.
I'm sending you a virtual shaka mahalo for listening to the whole episode. Thanks for being a part of my pod squad. And I love reading your comments and reviews. They are so helpful with just knowing I'm on the right path here, guiding me where the show should go in the future. So please continue to do that. You guys really are my people. And if you feel like you learned something from this episode, or if you try these research-based strategies at home, let me know what you think. Did it work for you? What's the struggle? You can throw that right into the review section on Apple Podcasts or right here in the comments below. I might even have Jackson read it on a future episode. Also, I will be working on a downloadable worksheet for you. It's a template for you to start a family discussion on this topic, and also resources on putting together a family media plan. So you can sign up for my newsletter to be sure to get those resources directly in your inbox. For anyone who wants additional resources, or maybe you didn't quite catch something or want to re-listen to a certain part of the podcast or get some notes, this episode is transcribed and summarized. There are time codes listed for each of the different sections and links to research. That's all in my show notes on malikadudley.com. That's also where you'll find direct links to my social media platforms and, of course, details on our monthly roving giveaways, which is my way of giving back to you for your awesome engagement. So please share, subscribe, and follow. Thank you so much. Well, in our next episode, episode 5, a couple of my best friends join me on the pod to apply the research-based strategies we learned today to our own lives. Here's a little teaser.
I have been on Facebook since pretty much day one. I went to an East Coast college and was one of the first few thousand people on it, and have probably been on it every day for 15 years. And that is horrifying. But at the same time, it's done so much good. And I struggle every day to have boundaries around that.
Episode 5 for a discussion about boundaries, creating rules, meeting our children where they are at, and some sneaky tips and tricks to help cut down on our media use. I also wanted to give a shout out to Communication Podcast listener Walter Dudley. Yep, that's my dad, for his review of episode number... Well, I'm not sure yet what number it's going to be, but it's the one about deception. My son Jackson is here to read what Papiwa wrote.
The podcast caused me to reflect and look at deception in a new way. Everyone has been deceived at some point in their lives, and everyone thinks that they can detect when someone is deceiving them. but I had no idea that it was such a complicated subject. And to quote the speaker, things aren't what they seem. The questions raised and answers given actually open windows to view things in some very different ways. We can all benefit from listening to this podcast to help us be better at both being truly honest and to help us detect deception, especially when the impact of the deception can cause hurt.
Thanks, Dad and Jackson. It really is a family affair. And as a special bonus for making it all the way to the end of this episode, the jingle you're about to hear also includes my entire family. Jackson did the beatboxing, my daughter Vaipuna singing, and my husband and I harmonizing. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Welcome to the Ohana.
Beautification of communication, the Communification Podcast.
Again. Bye.